Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, building experiences that connect, remove friction, and deliver insights. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Ed Kless, and with me today is Nick Jordan. Nick is the founder of Narrative, a platform that helps businesses in a variety of industries reach their goals using transformative data technology. In other words, he guides them through the systematic data monetization, acquisition, and sharing, whether they work in retail, finance, hospitality, healthcare, automotive, or agriculture. Additionally, he has spent most of his career in product management at roles at global technology-driven companies like Adobe and Yahoo. Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, Nick Jordan.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first off, Nick, why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? I do it to make the world a more efficient, a more productive, and hopefully a more pleasant place to live in.
And let's talk a little bit about that. Before we started recording, you mentioned that one of the things that your company specializes in is helping other companies monetize their own data. Talk a little bit about that. That seems fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at where technology is going across really every industry, it's all becoming much more data driven, whether it's, data in the form of analytics and dashboarding or data in the form of machine learning and increasingly artificial intelligence. And sort of inherent in that evolving technology landscape is the need for data. And when there's a need for something, oftentimes markets pop up. And so we're starting to see a lot more around data markets. And historically, data has been very hard to monetize and to sell. And to the extent that my goal is to make people's lives easier and to, through automation and efficiency, we've built a platform that hopefully delivers on that for the monetization of data.
Well, one of the things I can see that might be a concern is if I'm a business owner and I have all of this data, would my customers be concerned with how I monetize data because it's really the data about them? So,
yeah, it's not always the data about them. I think that's a common misconception that data means consumer data or customer data. We work with companies that have weather data. We work with companies that have data about carbon credits. We have data about autonomous vehicles in the ocean. And so certainly if consumer data is the data that's being sold and monetized, I think certainly companies should be transparent with their customers and make sure that they're doing the right thing there. But data does not have to mean data about a person. It could be data about really anything in the world around us.
And is this explosion in data really as a result of a lot of the Internet of Things, the sensors that are available? Like I think there's 17 sensors in my iPhone, something crazy like that.
Yeah, IoT is definitely a big part of it. I mean, we're literally measuring everything everywhere all the time. Sometimes for the express purpose of whatever that device is trying to do, right? If it's measuring, if it's rained or not, it may be turning on your sprinkler system, because it hasn't rained in a certain amount of time. But I think those devices are creating what is often referred to as exhaust data. So data that, can be used for purposes that's not specific to the device. And that's where we see a lot of those data monetization opportunities popping up.
Yeah, and just imagine things like I have a Roomba, for example, it goes around my house and it's got a map of my house. I mean, I suppose that might be worth it to somebody to say, okay, well, what's the square footage of these houses, and might even make recommendations on furniture for me, let's say. For sure.
And there's a bunch of mundane things. Like there are companies that scour city records and look at the last time the sewer pipes in front of your house were updated. And so if you're an insurance company and you're trying to figure out the likelihood that someone's going to have a sewer pipe break in their front yard and you're going to have to pay out on that, you actually want that data to better understand the risk of a bad event happening. And so again, I think data is pervasive in all of our lives in ways that we probably don't even realize.
I've heard it said that data in one sense is the new oil. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's been said a lot, and I think initially it was meant is primarily a good thing. I think people are now thinking of data kind of the same way they think about oil, where there may be some negative outcomes of data as well. And so I think the analogy still fits really well, but now people are using it more, like oil is, the cause of global warming. But I think, much like oil, it has a bunch of utility, right? You can create plastics, you can create jet fuel, you can, make your car go down the street, and those things are all great. And you can potentially do bad things with oil, and you can't use it, for everything in perpetuity. One, because it's a limited resource, and two, because it can do harmful things. Data is less of a limited resource. And in fact, data is, the one asset that you can make sort of an infinite number of copies of, unlike a fossil fuel, but certainly there can be some negative side effects that I think the world is starting to spend a little bit more time thinking about.
So are you finding that even smaller and smaller companies can be involved in the monetization of their own data?
100%. We're starting to see companies of all sizes, from single proprietor all the way up to Fortune 500 companies, thinking about monetizing their data. Oftentimes, the smaller companies, their data alone isn't sufficient, and so they want to be involved in a market where their data could potentially be combined with others' data to create a full picture. But I think if you look at the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons of the world, one of the reasons they're so successful is because they have all of this data and they're able to leverage it. And in fact, you can see that insofar that they're actually open sourcing a lot of their machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms that sit on top of the data, not because they're benevolent, but because they know that those algorithms really only work when you have data at the scale of a Google or an Amazon or a Facebook. And that's where I think, as smaller companies create almost data co-ops or sort of, collaborate around data, they can get to the scale that those big companies can, but do it through, thousands or tens of thousands of companies basically pooling their data together.
I don't know where I recall reading this, but I think I heard that one of the things Amazon did when they took back over a lot of their own shipping was specifically because they wanted control of that and understanding of that shipping data, as opposed to outsourcing it to UPS.
for sure, and they want to vertically integrate to some extent as well. The one other thing I'll say about data, which sets it apart a little bit from physical goods and traditional retail, is data tends to come with really high margins, right? Once the data is generated, the storing of that data, at the scales that we were talking about today, is pretty cheap. And so oftentimes you see companies that, they may be $1 billion plus revenue company, and you may say, hey, if they build a data business, it might be worth $50 million. Is that really interesting if you're already doing $1 billion in revenue? But if you're a low margin business that's doing $1 billion in revenue at a 5% or a 10% gross margin, $50 million of additional revenue at a 90% gross margin is still pretty compelling. And so I think that's another reason we're seeing more and more companies go into it. Is it's not just sort of a new revenue stream; it's a very high margin revenue stream.
Right. Data doesn't weigh much.
It does not. It does not. Although the major cloud providers will charge you a ton to move it out of their cloud. That's sort of the toll road that exists there, because they know once the data is portable, you have no reason to necessarily stay with that cloud. And so data is really what makes the world go around. And so the folks that can build toll booths around it certainly do, so they can keep the data within their ecosystem.
And Nick, we have an exit question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, who is a hero of yours and why are they a hero?
So I'm going to caveat this and say, I don't know that they're a hero, but there's someone I respect. And in the lead up, you said, well, that's actually the definition of hero. And generally, I don't think in terms of who my heroes are. And it's not that I don't respect and look up to people, but I kind of drive my own course. But, to the extent that what Amazon did for physical goods is what we're trying to do for digital goods, specifically data. I have to say Jeff Bezos is someone that I certainly look up to. I know that statement comes with a little bit of controversy these days because of Amazon's union stance and sort of the behemoth that they've become. But there was a time where he was a guy that said, "Hey, we're going to sell books on the internet." And turned it into Amazon, which, I think if you go 20 years back in time and look at where they were and what they said that they were going to do, it all sounds crazy. And you have to give him credit that he really, brought it well beyond that initial vision.
And lastly, Nick, how can somebody contact you?
So on Twitter, I'm Nick_Jordan. On LinkedIn, I'm sure you can search for me and find me. The company's at narrative.io. And then, from there, I'm sure you can find all the other channels to get a hold of me.
All right. Founder of Narrative, Nick Jordan, thanks so much for being a guest on the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for having
me. Review and subscribe by searching your podcast player of choice for Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.